No other way to say it. The political climate across America is heated. It's tumultuous right now, from Charlottesville and Capitol Hill to North Korea. And some of our own Oklahoma lawmakers have a seat at the table when it comes to some of the current events happening right now. So here on the show with us today to discuss everything and answer your questions, we have Oklahoma Congressman Tom Cole. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thank you.
It's been about a year since you were on the show last, so we were just
pretty tumultuous year.
Yeah, it has been. It's been a year for sure. I wanted to start off with something happening here at home. The news broke last night. Oklahoma City Public Schools suing our state legislators here. Going forward with a lawsuit to sue legislators for improper education funding. Do you think that there is a case there, and what's your response?
Well, I try to stay out of state issues since I'm not don't deal with them directly. But in this case, my curbstone legal opinion, being a non-lawyer, is there's probably not a case there. I think you ought to give the legislature an opportunity. They're probably going to come back into special session. They're going to have to deal with Supreme Court rulings that invalidated some of the funding measures that they engaged in at the end of last session. But it's a tough issue. It is just a tough issue.
But you don't think there's a case there? You don't think Oklahoma City Public Schools would win that?
No, but look, it's up to them. I mean, they have every right to pursue something. Look, I know they're trying to act in the best interest of the children they represent. So I don't have any problem with that, but I think I'm very skeptical that a local school board can force the state legislature to do what it wants to do. But again, that's what we have courts for, so if they want to go to court, we'll see. Okay.
Just wanted to kind of gauge your temperature on that. Taking us, nationally and really internationally now. Last night, President Trump addressed the nation about the 16-year, war in Afghanistan, saying that he gave the Pentagon permission to ramp up troops to Afghanistan. Do you agree with that decision that just came down from the president?
I do. I think it's an extremely difficult decision. We have to always remember Afghanistan is the place that 9/11 was conceived and launched from, and absent American presence there, it'll become ungoverned space again, and I think we'll see the same thing happen again. Recently talked to David Petraeus in Washington, and he made that point. He said ungoverned spaces are the most dangerous thing for our country because all the terrorists move there and then they don't stay there. So I think the president, who actually sort of reversed his position.
I was going to ask you, did it bother you that he flip-flopped?
No, it actually told me that he engaged in a serious exercise with his military and diplomatic advisors at the highest level. I actually talked to one of the top staffers in the White House last night. They did a good job of reaching out to members ahead of time to tell them what was coming. This individual told me, look, there were over 7 national security meetings the president was involved in, dozens of conversations. This is the considered judgment of his advisors. And I don't think it's going to lead to an immediate change of things. We also ought to recognize the scale here is nothing like we were in before. We were up to 100,000 people when President Obama was there. But I think the idea that, okay, maybe we're going to have 12, 15,000, we can manage the problem with that, but I don't have any illusions that we're going to change Afghanistan overnight with that. But we still have to make sure that space stays controlled by somebody that's not hostile to us. And we ought to recognize the Afghans are paying a pretty fierce price. We lost 14 soldiers. Every one of those was a tragedy last year. The Afghans lost 6,000. So there's not much question who's doing the bulk of the fighting. But I think you have to have American air power and American, frankly, special operators to reinforce what the Afghans are doing.
Yeah, maybe shows he's listening to his advisors. He also said, things change when you get behind the desk in the Oval Office, your opinions. And he definitely did have past criticisms on how much a war was costing us. But moving on, you've come out and said that the White House commotion kind of drowns out the GOP message, the mission. You've even come out and said the White House needs to be more disciplined. So, Congressman, have you been pleased with the Trump administration so far?
Well, yes, balance in terms of policy, absolutely. I think we're beginning to see the discipline emerge now that General Kelly's chief of staff. That's exactly what we saw last night. Was the result of a disciplined process, a president getting the best information, and frankly, in this case, a president changing his earlier stated viewpoint. So I think that's the appropriate way to proceed. This month, though, we've had everything from a change in staff with Steve Bannon leaving, to Charlottesville, to fire and fury in Korea, to Afghanistan. kind of hard for them to maintain a focus on, okay, what's happening domestically in the legislative process? Where are we achieving the objectives that the Republican Party and the president have laid out? Where are we not? And you know, we have those sorts of discussions, but it's hard to break through when you've got one story after another coming out of the White House that's so full of drama and significance.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Charlottesville. I did want to ask you that question. You know, we know those protests there started, you know, kind of initially over the argument whether or not to, you know, ban historic yet controversial symbols such as the Confederate flag, statues of Robert E. Lee, ban those from public spaces. Should they be taken away or should they not?
I actually think it's a separate debate. The groups that set up the demonstration were not like the Daughters of the Confederacy or local groups. These were a really hate-filled group. They're elements of the Klan, they're neo-Nazis. And so I think they used the debate over that as an excuse, honestly, to engage in really reprehensible activity that resulted in the deaths of 3 innocent people. You know, one of the counter-demonstrators and 2 police officers who, absent this, you know, demonstration, would not have been there in the capacity they were and would have not been killed in a helicopter accident. So let's start with that. In terms of the statues themselves, look, they fall into different kinds of categories. First of all, local people have the right to do locally whatever they want to do. If the people of Charlottesville make a decision, that's their decision. It's not a federal statue. We didn't pay for it. It's done locally, and I respect that. I don't particularly agree with it, but I respect it. If you're talking about statues on a battlefield, no. I mean, that's actually federal property in most cases in the national park system. Those were put there to commemorate people who fought there on both sides of this, and you can feel how you want about the battle, but those are historically significant. The third category is the statues in the Capitol itself. And those statues are placed, most of them that represent Confederates were placed by particular states. In other words, it's up to Virginia which 2 people want. Oklahoma chose Sequoyah and Will Rogers. Now, as a Chickasaw, I'm thinking, why do they have 2 Cherokees? But really, those are great figures in Oklahoma history and people we can be proud of. It's really up to the state of Alabama who they're going to put, or the state of Mississippi. And those change. The states have a right to change their positions, and some have changed and put different figures in over time. So I think you look at each one, but there's a process to arrive at a decision. It's not tearing down things. And I do think there is a danger here of losing your history. And there's a big difference between maybe you change the historical interpretation of a statue or you put it in context as opposed to take it down. But again, most of these are local and state decisions that need to be made by local and state people after a thorough process.
Okay. Congressman, thank you so much. We're breaking this into 2 segments, so we have even more questions
Sure.
firing your way on the other side of this break. But first